Truistery Vibes warmly welcomes all our beloved listeners. We're so glad to see you again in our familiar time slot.
Today,
Truistery Vibes brings you a brand new story, one that we hope will touch your heart and stay with you. As you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing the quote or moment that left the deepest impression on you. Wishing you a wonderful and meaningful listening experience. Aurelia Wrenwood paused at the threshold of the old warehouse-turned community center in downtown Seattle, brushing a loose strand of auburn hair behind her ear. She'd arrived 15 minutes early, her habit as a dedicated content editor for the Verdant Harbor Initiative, and already the room hummed with quiet anticipation. Rows of folding chairs faced a makeshift stage framed by potted ferns and hand-painted banners that read, "Urban Farming Tech for All." Volunteers drifted in, clutching laptops or clipboards, exchanging polite hellos. At the rear of the room, Aurelia scanned the crowd for familiar faces, the local nonprofits coordinator, a handful of social media interns, and, she reminded herself, the elusive Thorne Blackwood. At 32, he'd made a name as the driven CEO of Verdantia Labs, the startup behind the modular sensors powering these very pilot gardens. She'd admired the technology from afar. Now she'd get to document its human impact firsthand. A gentle tap on her shoulder made her turn. Thorne stood there, taller and more composed than the photos she'd seen on LinkedIn, broad shoulders under a charcoal blazer, sky, blue eyes focused and curious. He offered her a tentative smile. "Ms. Wrenwood." "Aurelia." "Please," she corrected with a warm tilt of her head. "And you must be Thorne." He nodded. "I'm glad you could join us. I hope traffic wasn't too brutal." She laughed. "Seattle at rush hour is a rite of passage. I'm just glad I made it." Behind them, the coordinator welcomed Thorne to the podium, thanking Verdantia Labs for their sponsorship. As the crowd settled, Aurelia slipped to an aisle seat, notebook in lap, her eyes flicking between Thorne and the projector screen. She'd attended enough corporate demos to know when to brace for jargon, and when to tune out. But already, she could tell this was different. Thorne's presentation was concise, but human. He spoke not just of sensor accuracy or data throughput, but of his grandmother's backyard orchard in rural Oregon, which had inspired his dream of making urban farming accessible to everyone. He described community members like Mrs. Carter, who'd check moisture readings before watering her tomato plants, and high school students who'd calculated crop yields for their biology projects. Aurelia scribbled notes. Personal anecdotes anchor the tech. Focus on real people, not just numbers. When the Q&A opened, she raised her hand. Thorne paused, then made eye contact. "How do you balance your role as CEO with on-the-ground engagement?" she asked. He tilted his head, considering. "I'm a product of both worlds," he said. "I studied ecology in college but fell into engineering. My challenge, and privilege, is weaving those threads together. If I don't stay connected with community partners, Verdantia becomes just another tech company. But when I'm out here, hearing stories and muddying my boots, I remember why we started." Aurelia felt a stir of admiration. He spoke with authenticity, not executive theater. As applause rippled through the room, she imagined how that exchange would read in her article. Not a recitation of specs, but a portrait of a leader who knew his roots. After the formal program, volunteers mingled around booths showcasing DIY sensor kits and starting stations. Thorne drifted toward Aurelia, holding 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with oat milk. "I wasn't sure which you'd prefer," he said, offering the latte. She smiled. "You got it right." They wandered through the stalls together. Aurelia chatted with a high school teacher demonstrating a rainwater harvesting module. Thorne listened intently, jotting down questions. At one table, a teenage girl beamed as she watched her basil seedlings perk up after a sensor-guided watering. "How old are you?" Thorne asked the girl gently. "Looks like you've mastered the system." 15. She said, pride lighting her features. "I want to start a school garden next spring. Then you'll need extra moisture sensors." Thorne leaned in, offering one from a sample bin. "My treat." Aurelia watched him explain wiring diagrams with such patience that the girl's initial shyness melted away. She thought, this is leadership in its purest form, lifting others, not just directing them. By late afternoon, the crowd had thinned. Volunteers packed away equipment, leaving the cavernous room smelling of damp soil and fresh coffee. Thorne found Aurelia at the exit, checking her phone. "You okay finding your ride?" he asked. "I was actually hoping you'd walk me to my car," she admitted. "I want to hear more about Verdanche's next pilot project." He grinned. "I'd be happy to." They strolled down the block toward the parking garage, talking shop and sharing stories. Her research on community-supported agriculture, his vision for scaling up sensor networks in low-income neighborhoods. Overhead, storm clouds gathered, typical Pacific Northwest weather, but neither noticed. When they reached her car, Thorne paused. "I've really enjoyed today. If you're free tomorrow evening, would you join me for dinner back at Ravenwood Grove? My family's hosting a small welcome gathering." Aurelia blinked. It was bold, inviting a colleague to meet the parents before any personal rapport, but she sensed sincerity. "I'd love to," she said. He smiled, relief and anticipation flickering in those blue eyes. "Great. I'll text the details." 2 nights later, Aurelia drove the winding mountain road up to Ember Hollow. Twinkling lanterns lit a veranda hanging with ferns and ivy. Inside, a long wooden table was set with mismatched china and fresh wildflowers. Gentle laughter echoed from the living room. She stepped onto the porch, smoothing her blazer. Thorne appeared at the door, dressed in chinos and a knit sweater. "Welcome," he said, taking her coat and guiding her inside. Cornelius Blackwood rose first, a tall, silver-haired man with kind eyes. He extended a hand. "Ms. Wrenwood, or shall I say Aurelia? I'm Cornelius." Next came Aurelia, her warm smile and soft voice immediately easing Aurelia's nerves. "We're so happy to have you." Then Serafina bounded forward, wrapping Aloan in a quick hug. "I've heard so much. Finally, I get to meet the genius behind the articles." Aurelia laughed, heart lifting. The Blackwoods were gracious hosts, curious about her background and genuinely interested in her impressions of Ember Hollow's community garden. Over homemade stew and warm bread, stories flowed, Cornelius recalling his days planting orchard trees, Aurelia offering tips on native wildflowers, Serafina teasing Thorne about his childhood antics building forts in the woods. Between mouthfuls, Thorne reached across the table to clasp Aurelia's hand, his smile conveying gratitude and shared excitement. When the night wound down, Thorne led Aurelia back to her car under a canopy of stars. He paused, gazing down at her. "How did I get so lucky?" he murmured. "Thank you for saying yes." Aurelia's heart fluttered. "Thank you for inviting me into your world." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Would you mind making this official?" A small velvet box appeared in his hand. Aurelia's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "I want to build a future with you, here, in Ember Hollow, and wherever our work takes us," he said. "Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to her eyes as she nodded, voice catching. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her close for a tender kiss beneath the lantern light. In that moment, surrounded by the hush of fir trees and the promise of new beginnings, Aurelia Wrenwood and Thorne Blackwood began their journey from partners in purpose to partners in life. Aurelia Wrenwood sat in the passenger seat of her rental sedan as it wound up the gravel drive to the Blackwood estate in Ember Hollow. Morning mist clung to the pines, and the air smelled of damp earth and cedar. She smoothed the front of her silk blouse for the 3rd time that hour, feeling suddenly overdressed in tailored trousers while Thorne Blackwood, driving beside her, looked impossibly relaxed in a worn denim shirt and faded khakis. Today was the first official welcome to the family brunch hosted by his mother. Aurelia, a test Aurelia knew she couldn't afford to fail. As they climbed the short stone staircase to the front porch, Aurelia emerged on the veranda in a crisp linen dress, arms crossed but lips curved in a polite smile. Behind her, white columns framed an elegant but unpretentious foyer. Wrought iron lanterns hung on either side of the door, and wind chimes sang softly in the breeze. Aurelia admired the scene for a heartbeat until Eulalia stepped forward, extending her hand. "Good morning, Aurelia," she said, her voice warm but measured. "I'm so pleased you could make it." "Aunt Eulalia," Aurelia replied, shaking her hand. "Thank you for having me." Thorne slipped an arm around his mother's shoulder. "She's staying for brunch," he said. "I hope that's okay." Eulalia's smile flickered. "Of course. Though I do hope you understand our family tradition. We prepare everything from scratch." She gave Aurelia a swift once-over. "I hear you're not much of a cook." Aurelia's heart skipped. I can follow a recipe," she managed. "Splendid," Eulalia said crisply. "We'll start in the kitchen. There's plenty to do." Inside, the kitchen was luminous, all marble counters and polished oak cabinets. Eulalia gestured toward a long island piled with produce, plump heirloom tomatoes, bundles of spring garlic, thick slabs of country bacon, and 2 massive mixing bowls. "First," Eulalia began, "we're making quiche Lorraine for the table. You'll wash potatoes, skin on, and slice them very thin. I'll handle the custard." She handed Aurelia a chef's knife. "Use this." Aurelia's palms sweated as she nodded, dragging her fingertips over the blade's edge. She'd never wielded a high-end santoku like this. Thorne hovered behind her, gaze soft but concerned. "Potatoes right here," he murmured, pointing to a wicker basket. "I'll peel them." As Thorne disappeared to the sink with a paring knife, Eulalia cleared her throat. "Now, I know you're used to city life," she said, voice tight. "But here in Ember Hollow, guests expect a meal that took hours of preparation. Family is built around the table." Aurelia blinked. "Of course, sigh." Eulalia cut her off. She opened a drawer to reveal a stack of embroidered dish towels. "I made these last spring when you two announced your engagement. Your initials, painted in periwinkle." She handed one to Aurelia. "Dry the potatoes once they're sliced, then toss them in butter and herbs from our garden." Aurelia accepted the towel, voice small. "Thank you." As she began slicing the potatoes, in a way she hoped was straight and even, Eulalia moved to the counter, rolling out a delicate pastry crust. From the next room, Serafina's voice drifted. "Hey sis, I overcooked the bacon again. Could you take a look?" Aurelia exhaled. Serafina, kind, bubbly Serafina, was always the peacemaker. But today, even Serafina seemed on edge. She emerged rubbing her palms with paper towels. Straw blonde hair framed her heart-shaped face. She offered Aurelia a tight smile. "Need help with the bacon?" Serafina asked as she eyed the sizzling strips on a cast-iron skillet. "No, go on," Aurelia said, adjusting her grip on the knife. "I've got the potatoes." Serafina glanced at Eulalia, who nodded briskly. Serafina retreated, leaving Aurelia alone under the matriarch's watchful gaze. An hour later, the quiche crust lay filled with custard and strips of bacon. The sliced potatoes had been marinated in butter, rosemary, thyme, and sea salt, ready for roasting. Aurelia's knife work was functional but imperfect, some slices too thick, others too thin, and she knew Eulalia noticed. "Why don't you wash up, dear?" Eulalia suggested, wiping her hands on a towel. "I'll transfer these to the oven." Aurelia stiffened. Could I help with the salad? Or roll those cinnamon rolls?" She forced a smile. "No," Eulalia said, straightening a dishcloth. "I want you to relax. Your hands are shaking." Aurelia dropped the towel on the counter. "I'd rather help." Eulalia's expression hardened. "When you live here, you'll have time for everything. Today, you're my guest and an observer. I need to see how you adapt before I entrust any more tasks to you." The words landed like stones. Aurelia's cheeks flamed. She opened her mouth, closed it. "I see," she whispered, then turned to the sink, arms trembling as she submerged her hands in scalding water to clean the knives. While quiche and potatoes baked, Eulalia directed Serafina and 2 hired help to set the garden table under a trellis dripping with wisteria. Meantime, Serafina tried to reassure Aurelia when she passed her by the sink. "You're doing great," Serafina said softly. "He loves you. That's what matters." Aurelia managed a nod, though her heart hurt. Was she really so incompetent? She'd grown up in a single-parent home, learned to order takeout more than to stir a roux. She'd never been judged for it until today. Suddenly, Thorne appeared in the doorway. "I saved you a cinnamon roll," he said, thrusting a pastry in her direction. "I think Aurelia made them herself." They stood awkwardly by the sink. Aurelia accepted the roll, took a nervous bite. A sweet, tender dough, flecked with cinnamon sugar. "They're amazing," she said. Thorne smiled, brushing a crumb from her lip. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're okay." He slipped away. Serafina reappeared. "She's tough," Serafina said, half laughing. "Give it time." Aurelia swallowed. "I hope so." The table was set by noon. A wide oak slab, dressed with linen runners and brass lanterns, groaned under platters of quiche, roasted potatoes, mixed greens, and fresh, baked rolls. Glasses of sparkling elderflower punch caught sunlight. Aurelia stood at the head of the table, hands clasped. "Welcome, everyone. It means so much that you could join us today to celebrate our family's newest member." Her eyes flicked to Aurelia. "I trust you're feeling settled?" Aurelia met her gaze with forced composure. "Thank you for having me, Aunt Aurelia. I'm grateful." A tense silence followed before Lachlan and Serafina began carving the quiche, and guests helped themselves. The first few bites passed, then Aurelia cleared her throat. "Aurelia, I wanted to ask, how do you balance your freelance schedule with home life? I've always believed that a wife should be present for family dinner every night." Thorne stiffened beside Aurelia. She took a breath. "In my experience, modern families share roles more flexibly. Dinner may not always be at 6, but we make time when we can." Aurelia raised a single eyebrow. "I see. My mother taught me that the hearth is the heart of a home. A dinner whenever mentality sounds diffuse." Aurelia's chest tightened. "I believe it's about intention, not the clock. When I cook, I want to be fully there." Aurelia nodded slowly. "We shall see." Around the table, polite chatter resumed, but Aurelia felt every eye on her. Gossip slipped into half-heard whispers. "She's so young. Freelance writer? Can she really uphold family tradition?" By dessert, lemon tart and chamomile tea, the tension had only thickened. Aurelia leaned back and studied Aurelia over her cup. "You and Thorne have an exciting life ahead," she said softly. "But I worry what happens when a big project takes you away for days. Our family has conventions, Sunday services, holiday feasts. Do you honor them?" Aurelia chose her words carefully. "I honor them deeply. I never want to miss something important." Aurelia's lips curved. "Good. Because in this family, we do everything to strengthen bonds. Sacrifice for each other." She sipped her tea, allowing that to hang in the air. After the guests filtered out, Serafina helped her mother clear plates while Aurelia and Thorne washed glasses at the sink. Aurelia hovered nearby. "Thank you for your help," Aurelia said as she dried a tumbler. "It's just a start," Aurelia replied. "I know you mean well. I also know that love isn't nearly enough. Action is what builds trust. Do you think you can rise to that challenge?" Aurelia's throat constricted. "Yes," she said, finding her voice. "I want to." Aurelia gave a single nod, then approached Thorne. "We need to talk privately." She led him into the library, leaving Aurelia alone for the first time in hours. In the library, rows of leather-bound tomes glowed in amber lamplight. Thorne sank into a high-backed chair. Aurelia perched on the ottoman. "Why did you invite her here today?" she asked quietly. Thorne paused. "Because I want you to know her, and because I love her." Aurelia's gaze was frank. "I can see that, but I want family stability. She'll need to learn our ways." Thorne folded his hands. "I'm asking you to give her time. She's city-born, city-bred. Some things will take adjustment." Aurelia's shoulders eased. "I suppose I can be patient if she proves she's willing." Thorne reached for her hand. She is. Outside, Aurelia set the last glass on the drying rack and let out a shaky breath. The conflict had been more intense than she'd imagined. She wiped her hands and went to find Thorne. In the library doorway, she watched them, mother and son, in quiet conversation. Eulalia's had nodded once as Thorne spoke. Then they parted with a small W embrace. Aurelia tapped on the door. Thorne opened it, eyes soft. She's open to it, he said. It'll be okay. Aurelia hugged him, relief and exhaustion mingling. I'll do my best, she whispered. He kissed her forehead. That's all I ask. Later that evening, as Ember Hollow's sunset painted the sky in rose and violet, Aurelia tucked a new embroidered dish towel, blue linen with her initials in silver, into her tote. Serafina slipped it over her shoulder with a wink. She's giving you a chance, Serafina said. Now it's up to you. Aurelia nodded, determination stirring. The road ahead would be fraught with tradition and expectation. But if love and honesty could navigate a weekend of gentle critiques and simmering tension, perhaps they could build something stronger, together. And as she drove down the winding, lantern-lit lane back toward Cascade Heights, she allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. She would learn. She would adapt. But above all, she would remain true to herself. Forging a new family path where honoring the hearth meant honoring each other. Over the next 3 months, Aurelia and Thorne embarked on a deliberate experiment in intimacy and independence, transforming their tiny Meridian Row apartment in Seattle into a shared laboratory of routines, rituals, laughter, and compromise. What began as a test, 3 months living apart together, away from Ember Hollow's family rhythms, evolved into a profound journey that neither of them could have anticipated. Their first dawn together felt electric. Aurelia stirred awake to the hiss of the espresso machine, the rich aroma of coffee mingling with the faint scent of rain on asphalt. In one practice motion, Thorne pressed the portafilter, tilted 2 cups beneath the spout, and coaxed sweet oat milk into perfect foam. He carried those mugs like sacred vessels across the room. Aurelia blinked up from her laptop, where the first glow of a new article draft illuminated her face. As he placed one latte at her elbow, she reached for it instinctively, the warmth spreading through her fingers. Good morning, he murmured, sliding onto the edge of the bed. Hazelnut. She smiled, nodding. Exactly. They lingered in that half-light, sharing sips and dreams before the city roared to life outside. Aurelia sketched headlines in her mind, urban farming with a heart, while Thorne reviewed slides for an upcoming investor pitch. In the hush before deadlines and meetings, they reaffirmed their partnership, clutching coffee cups as though they were lifelines. By mid-week, routine chores surfaced like inevitable tests of compatibility. Aurelia tackled laundry armed with color-coded baskets and a laminated cheat sheet, but Thorne soon heard her swearing from the laundry room. She poked her head around the door. I think I've shrunk your favorite gray tea. Thorne emerged, examining the teeny shirt with mock solemnity. A tragic loss, he declared, offering her a consoling hug. But at least we're learning. Their first domestic mishap ended in laughter and an impromptu road trip to a vintage shop, where they tried on dozens of retro tees, Aurelia's laughter trailing him down aisles of bell-bottoms and paisley prints. They found a shirt that fit better than the original, softer, worn-in, and a perfect symbol of adaptation. Weekend mornings were reserved for the balcony garden. Meridian Row's narrow ledge overlooked a clutter of alley roofs, but with a few planter boxes, it became their green refuge. Thorne, whose startup Verdantia Labs specialized in urban agriculture technology, unpacked bags of rich potting soil. Aurelia spooned seeds into neat rows. Their first attempt at mint went overboard, dozens of seeds lodged in a single pot, sprouting into a mini jungle. It's like mint, aged on. Thorne laughed, kneeling to inspect the chaos. She brushed dirt from her palms. Better too much than too little, right? They spent Saturday mornings thinning sprouts and planting new crops: basil for pesto, rosemary for roasted potatoes, chives for scrambled eggs. Each little leaf felt like a shared victory, teaching patience and the joy of nurturing something small into flourishing life. When first frost threatened, they improvised scarves and overturned coffee cans as nighttime cloches. At midnight, they whispered encouragements to their plants as though speaking to fragile children. Nights at home demanded inventive rituals. Aurelia championed Cultural Wednesdays when they streamed indie films from around the world. One evening, they sat beneath a patchwork quilt, subtitles flickering across the screen as they watched a Korean slice-of-life drama in which a grandmother tended her rooftop garden. The rapid dialogue flew past, leaving them giggling over misheard lines and spilt popcorn. Subtitle marathons should be an Olympic sport, Thorne said, wiping butter from his chin. She smiled. We'll call it training. On alternate evenings, he insisted on space opera Saturdays, resurrecting his childhood love for interstellar epics. They cheered at laser battles and sighed at doomed romances on distant planets, their heads leaning together under the glow of neon credits. Laughter, tears, and shared snacks sealed those nights as theirs alone. Neither Ember Hollow tradition nor city anonymity, but a new hybrid of intimacy. Cooking became their shared playground and school. One Tuesday, Aurelia attempted shakshuka, a North African dish of eggs poached in tomato, pepper stew. She cranked the heat too high, turning the peppers into limp threads. The eggs slid from their nests like startled ducks. When they served it over toasted sourdough, it was a saucy mess, but they ate every mouthful, declaring it a triumph of effort over precision. Thorne's own debut in the kitchen yielded a sushi rice disaster. He followed an online tutorial too literally, using rock, hard grains meant for risotto. The result was a gummy slab rather than delicate sushi. Defeated, he sliced the mass into patties, pan-frying them until golden. They drizzled soy glaze over the crispy cakes and declared them surprisingly delicious, a lesson in improvisation and second chances. By week 4, they hosted a balcony Korean barbecue for neighbors they barely knew. They rigged a portable grill, invited everyone to bring one ingredient, and supplied homemade kimchi from Aurelia's online research. Meat sizzled next to stainless steel grills. Grill smoke and laughter curled into the evening. Thorne introduced a sensor prototype that displayed real-time temperature. Aurelia beamed as neighbors eyed the app on their phones. Together, they had birthed a community event, proof that their combined strengths could create more than individual achievements. Amid joy, minor conflicts surfaced, thermostat tug-of-war and the classic toilet seat debate. Aurelia craved cool air. Thorne wanted to stave off Seattle's damp chill. Each morning they'd wake to a war zone of temperature settings until they agreed. Nights at 60, 8 degrees, days at 70, 2. The toilet seat, meanwhile, became a test of grace. After tipping battles and passive-aggressive notes, they surrendered to a simple seat-down rule, plastering a silly magnet to remind them. The magnet's cartoon moose, captioned "Sit right, sleep tight," became a gag gift and daily reminder that communication trumped smug satisfaction. Work demanded they juggle schedules. Aurelia faced back-to-back interviews for her in-depth feature on community gardens. Thorne prepared investor slide decks in his makeshift home office. When exhaustion etched their faces, they snapped each other out of hyperfocus. Aurelia brought him homemade biscotti with a side of fresh, squeezed juice. Thorne packed her lunch and slipped a sticky note. "Breathe. You're doing great," under her laptop. They learned to see each other's strain, to pause deadlines for short hugs, and to know that love sometimes meant stepping away from screens. Their relationship deepened in the mundane. They mapped walking routes through unexpected alleys lit by fairy lights, discovered a hidden taco truck on 12th Avenue whose smoky al pastor made them vow to return weekly, and slurped hot ramen at a hole-in-the-wall shop during a thunderstorm, dripping broth onto soggy napkins and tasting perfect contentment. Midpoint arrived like a milestone. 6 weeks in, they declared a halfway homecoming celebration. Aurelia dusted off embroidered dish towels, gifts from Aurelia, and set the table on the balcony, candlelight flickering in windproof holders. Thorne grilled salmon steaks, brushing them with honey soy glaze, and filled mason jars with mint-infused lemonade. As jazz standards floated from the tiny speaker, they raised their glasses. To surviving apart together. Thorne toasted. Aurelia clinked her glass. To thriving apart together. They paused, eyes lit with shared accomplishment. The apartment, once a temporary address, now pulsed with memories. Laughter echoing off bare walls, the hum of the espresso machine at dawn, green shoots bursting through potting soil. By the final weekend, packing up felt bittersweet. Their tabletop herb garden, once a handful of seeds, now offered fresh sprigs for every meal. The bookcase overflowed with cookbooks, self-help tomes on relationship communication, and handwritten recipe cards splotched with grease and love. The laundry hamper held shirts neatly folded, save for the odd sock that had gone missing in week 2's trial wash. Driving north to Ember Hollow, the freeway stretched beneath gray clouds, then opened onto rolling hills and cedar forests. Aurelia reached across the console, slipping her hand into Thorne's. They'd spent 90 days carving a shared life from the chaos of boxes and uncharted routines. Now they returned to family traditions, to Ember Hollow's quiet mornings and annual blueberry festivals, but armed with hard-won skills, the ability to laugh at small disasters, the patience to water mint at midnight, and the empathy to say, "Let me take that," when the other looked frazzled. Pulling into the gravel driveway, they found Ember Hollow's silhouette, the Blackwood house framed by dawn's pale light. They paused, taking in the familiar facade and the promise of new beginnings. "I'm ready," Aurelia said softly. Thorne squeezed her hand. Always. Hand in hand, they climbed the porch steps, warmed by the knowledge that love was not a fixed state but a daily practice, a series of rituals and mistakes, of shared coffees and late-night embrace, of forgiving the dryer and celebrating a rogue batch of cookies. Their 3 months living apart together had taught them to build home wherever they stood, together. And as they stepped through the door, back into the traditions of Ember Hollow, into the embrace of family, and toward the next chapter of their life, they carried with them the most valuable lesson of all, that partnership, tested in small moments, is the grandest adventure imaginable. Over the morning haze, Aurelia and Thorne had assumed their 3-month experiment in separate living would end with fond farewells and closure, not with sirens and splintered bones. It started innocuously enough, with Saturday rituals rooted so deeply in comfort that they scarcely acknowledged their importance. At 8:07 a.m., the apartment stirred. Sunlight slanted through Venetian blinds, dust motes danced in its beams, and the hush before the city's hum wrapped them in silence. Aurelia opened her eyes to the hiss of the espresso machine, then blinked at the 2 mugs Thorne held like precious artifacts, one labeled Aurelia, the other Thorne. He set them down, and she inhaled the rich, nutty aroma of hazelnut coffee. Still in pajamas, she wrapped her fingers around her cup. "Lavender honey latte?" she asked, surprised at the slight floral sweetness. "Special Saturday edition," Thorne replied, settling beside her on the edge of the bed. "Our reward for surviving the week." He brushed a damp strand of hair off her forehead. "Ready for our run?" Aurelia tipped her mug in salute. "Lead the way." They dressed quickly, leggings for her, running shorts for him, grabbed matching water bottles, and locked the door before descending the building staircase. Her heart fluttered as they merged into the morning crowd. Bicyclists, dog walkers, early commuters. On rainy days, the city seemed draped in mist. Today, the air blazed clear and crisp. They fell into stride on the waterfront trail that wound along Elliott Bay, feet falling in synchronicity. The lighthouse at Pier 66 loomed ahead, its lights muted by dawn. Thorne's pace was steady, experience honed by triathlons, while Aurelia matched him, reveling in the burn of her muscles, the wind whipping her hair into tangled strands. "Coffee stop before we hit the market?" he suggested, voice carrying over the splash of her lungs. "Make it an experimental one," she grinned. "I want to try that new oat and spice place on 4th. They veered off the main path, winding through alleyways until the cafe signage appeared. A minimalist neon lotus blinked awake.
Inside.
They warmed their fingers on to-go cups, chai oat latte and turmeric almond, and found a corner window seat. Outside, seagulls cawed overhead. Inside, heat and scents filled their senses. Aurelia closed her eyes on her first sip. Heaven in a cup, she murmured. Thorne chuckled. I knew you'd like it.
Now.
Shall we? They resumed their route west, towards the Pike Place stretch that brimmed with produce stalls and seafood carts. At the mouth of the market, a brick arch declared, home of the flying fish. Tourists snapped selfies with vendors tossing salmon. Aurelia paused to gape, then laughed. Only us, right? Thorne offered his arm. Come on. We're not here just for laughs. We're here for the patience test. And the coffee fuel. Drawn by the lure of fresh fruit, Aurelia wandered into the berry section. Strawberries so red they threatened to stain her lips. Blackberries glistening like onyx. She dropped handfuls into a pint container, then realized her phone glowed with real-time updates, reminders, deadlines, urgencies. Despite the day's promise, reality beckoned. She tapped away. Her editor needed revisions on the hydroponics feature. Sources in Portland awaited her call. The proposal for Verdantia Labs' next pilot was due by Monday. Anxiety clenched her chest. Thorne watched her, brows knitting in concern. Hey. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You good? She exhaled. It's just deadlines. I hate missing my morning slot. He guided her away from the stall's fluorescent lights into a quieter corridor. So don't. We'll talk after lunch. Now focus on these. He handed her a pint of peaches, ripe and sun-warmed from the farms of Yakima Valley. The sweet scent anchored her. She bit into a slice, juice sliding down her chin. Laughter erupted overhead as tourists tried to toss coins behind Pike Place Market's famous piggy bank. For a moment, the city's pulse felt alive, unthreatening. They strolled on. On a bench overlooking the bay, Thorne pulled out his phone, toggled a sensor app. Look. Water temperature's perfect for salmon smolt. If we sequence the next deployment there, grant calls should flow in. I love watching you geek out, Aurelia said. She nestled into his side. Promise me we'll finish that new cafe before your brain explodes? He tapped the screen.
Deal.
But only if you promise to finish. A sudden wobble disrupted his last word. He turned. Aurelia's foot had caught a chunk of gravel that shifted beneath her. She lurched, arms flailing. Her eyes widened in alarm as her right leg twisted beneath her weight. Thorne lunged forward too late. A horrid crack split the air. Thorne swallowed the scream rising in his throat. Aurelia knelt, hand pressed to the ground as if it might steady her. She gasped once, then again. Harsh pain etched across her face. Aurelia. He dropped to his knees beside her. Don't move it. Don't move. His heart hammered so violently he could barely catch his breath. Stay calm. I've called 911. He clenched her hand. White light panic fused with the pain as she trembled. Thorne, it hurts so much. He cradled her shoulder, leaning his broad frame over her. Help is coming. Just hold on. Sirens tore through the hush of the early morning crowd. Paramedics bounded over barriers, rushing between tourists who leapt aside. One knelt to stabilize her leg, his hands practiced, gentle. Another pressed an oxygen mask to her face. Thorne followed every movement, answering the paramedics' questions, name, history, allergies, and feeling the ground shift beneath him as Aurelia was strapped to the gurney. She stared at him, tears streaming, fear and trust tangled in her gaze. He kissed her knuckles. I'm right here. We'll get through this. Paramedics loaded her into the ambulance. The door slammed and the sirens screaming wounded his ears as Thorne sprinted to the passenger seat, throwing himself inside. Providence General's trauma entrance reeked of antiseptic and urgency. Thorne stumbled after the gurney, heart racing. In a flurry, Aurelia was whisked into a trauma bay. Thorne scrubbed up under a nurse's direction before being allowed in. Doctors worked swiftly. For line X-rays, vital checks. A radiologist slid an image onto the screen. Her tibia snapped clean through beneath the knee.
Dr.
Reynolds, a tall woman in scrubs and gentle authority, gestured for Thorne's attention. Her fracture is displaced, she said quietly. We need to reduce and fixate it under anesthesia. I'll need your consent. Thorne's hand shook as he signed the consent form. Will she be okay? He asked, voice hoarse. She's stable, Dr. Reynolds replied. Once we realign and pin the bone, her prognosis for full recovery is very good. We'll keep her overnight. Thorne nodded, relief momentarily flooding him, then draining away in exhaustion. He sank into a plastic chair by Aurelia's frozen hospital bed, mind swirling with fear and hope. The hours after surgery blurred into a soft haze of monitors beeping and gentle steps on linoleum floors. Aurelia drifted in and out of consciousness, pain medication tugging at her edges. Thorne sat vigil at her bedside, hand clamped around hers, refusing to leave her side even for a moment. In the pale dawn light, he watched the rise and fall of her chest, marveling at her resilience and drowning in relief that the worst was over. Nurses checked her vitals every 30 minutes, adjusting for drips and monitoring her newly inserted titanium rod. Through groggy haze, Aurelia recognized Eulalia's steady voice. How are you feeling? Her mother-in-law asked, eyes soft with concern. Lachlan hovered at the doorway, a tray of fresh fruit and herbal tea in hand. Serafina hovered behind him, offering softly folded victory socks and a paperback novel. Aurelia managed a watery smile. Thank you, she whispered. Her voice cracked like a fragile bridge. Each syllable grounded her to reality. She was safe, among the people who loved her most. Over the next days, the Blackwood household transformed into a round-the-clock care network. Thorne became adept at administering pain relief, unwrapping crisp gauze, and checking Dr. Reynolds's daily instructions. On afternoon visits, Eulalia arrived with homemade chicken soup and rice porridge, warmth in a bowl, while Lachlan brought quiet, steady comfort, always knowing when to speak and when to simply sit in solidarity. Serafina moved in to help, offering cheerful distractions, reading aloud from Austen classics or recounting village gossip from Ember Hollow, her voice lilting in perfect sisterly cadence. By the second night, Aurelia's spirits sank, immobilized, dependent, and frustrated. She hated relying on others. Thorne caught her silent tears as he adjusted her ice pack. His heart twisted. I know this feels unfair, he murmured, but let me take care of you. She averted her gaze. I'm sorry I ruined our plan. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. You didn't ruin anything. You fell. I'll catch you. Tears shimmered in her eyes. In that moment, vulnerability drew them closer than any morning coffee ritual could. Physical therapy began on day 3. The therapist, kind but firm, guided Aurelia through passive stretches, reminding her that healing was a marathon, not a sprint. Thorne sat in on every session, clapping softly at each small milestone. An additional degree of bend, 10 more seconds of standing. He packed her leftover fruit from Eulalia's soup into a thermos for snack time, played her favorite acoustic playlist to mask the clinic's bland ambience, and drove her home, crutches rattling in the back seat. Evenings became a deliberate routine of rebuilding. Thorne read aloud from her notebook, project notes, early drafts, to-do lists, keeping her mind engaged. Eulalia hovered in the hallway, ready with peppermint tea. Lachlan offered his arm for crutch practice. Serafina stayed late with board games that required minimal movement, Scrabble on a lap tray, Jenga balanced on a rolling over-bed table. Laughter filled the house, soft and determined, as the family refused to let the accident define future months. One afternoon, for days post-op, Aurelia managed to will herself into the kitchen. Her crutches leaned against the wall as she balanced on one good leg. Eulalia watched from the doorway, arms crossed. Be careful, she warned. Aurelia drew a deep breath. I want to make us tea. She poured hot water, unsteady hands tipping the kettle. Steam billowed. The scent of bergamot found its way through the air, promising comfort. She set 2 cups on the counter, one for herself, one carried back to Thorne in the living room. He looked up from his laptop, eyes bright. "Here?" he asked, smiling at her triumph. She nodded, wincing as she took a slow sip. "Still too hot." He took the second cup and blew on it, then handed it to her. Slowly. She let the warmth spread through her fingers, through her chest. In that humble gesture, the passing of a tea mug, they celebrated a quieter victory than surgery, the daily ritual of caring for each other. After a week, the surgeon cleared Aurelia for limited movement. She took her first unassisted steps in the living room, crutches still at her side, her right leg wobbly but willing. Thorne stood before her, breath caught, hands ready to catch her if she faltered. She shimmied forward, a tiny, triumphant stride. He broke into applause. "You did it," Aurelia, peeking around the doorway, applauded with tears in her eyes. Serafina gave a whoop worthy of a stadium. Lachlan grinned from the hallway. Aurelia's face broke into a tired, ecstatic grin of her own. She reached out, steadying herself, and allowed the cheers to wash over her like healing rain. By the second week, home became their rehabilitation clinic. 3 times a day, Aurelia practiced gentle range of motion exercises in the living room, like lifts, mini squats, foot circles. Each repetition cheered on by Thorne, who tracked her progress on a whiteboard labeled wins. He cross-referenced doctor's orders with printed physical therapy notes, ensuring they followed protocol precisely. In the evenings, they traded roles. She read strategy articles about Ember Hollow's community gardens to him. He read science fiction short stories to her, so she could rest her aching eyes. Aurelia's dependence gradually gave way to confidence. By day 10, she marched down the hallway on crutches to retrieve mail. She sneaked into the laundry room to toss in a load of lights, Thorne's socks and her own leggings, then hauled herself back to the living room. Each chore reclaimed felt like a step closer to wholeness. The emotional climax came on the eve of her release. Aurelia sat by the hospital window, no longer a patient, but still under observation, watching sunset bleed through the sky. Thorne arrived bearing a single wildflower he'd pressed between pages, its yellow petals edged in brown. He tucked it into her hair. "You're going home tomorrow," he said softly. Tears welled. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I fall again? What if I can't do the work you love? What if?" He caught her chin gently. "Hey, look at me." His clear, unwavering gaze met hers. "You are strong. You've fought every moment of pain and fear. We'll adapt together. I'll be by your side." She closed her eyes, letting the words and his presence calm the tremors in her heart. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains as they returned home. Aurelia climbed the steps of Meridian Row slowly, crutches tapping the concrete like a determined metronome. Thorne helped her inside, whisked off her coat, and guided her to the couch. He placed a plush cushion behind her back and propped her crutches nearby. "Welcome home," he said, voice thick with relief. Aurelia bustled in behind him, arms full of homemade chicken noodle soup in a thermos and soft, button-front pajamas. Lachlan carried a tray of herbal tea and fresh fruit. Serafina skidded across the floor in fuzzy slippers, holding a stack of board games. "Let's celebrate," Serafina declared, stacking Jenga blocks on the coffee table. Aurelia watched her makeshift welcome-home party with gratitude, so overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. They'd carried her through the darkest days, and now they were here to champion her return. She took a slow sip of soup, warm, salty, restorative. Recovery at home was its own journey. Thorne converted a corner of the living room into her safe zone. Extra pillows, Med's chart pinned to the wall, a tablet stand for hands-free watching. He immersed himself in research, online forums for fracture recovery, apps to track her mobility progress, ergonomic crutch tips, so that each adjustment made her life easier. He carried groceries in weekly, unpacking them so she could sit at the counter with her legs elevated while he cooked. They experimented, pureed vegetable blends she could sip through a straw. Soft scrambled eggs disguised under feta and herbs. He learned to measure painkiller dosages precisely, never faltering in his compassion or his focus. Evenings they attempted small rituals. Shoulder massages while watching old family videos, Slow, seated dances in the living room to Cole Porter classics, whispered conversations about their future home in Ember Hollow, sketching floor plans on scrap paper. Aurelia's therapy visits continued, each session pushing her a bit further, balancing on one foot, climbing 2 steps without support, taking a tentative stroll down the hallway. Thorne was there every time, arms steady, encouragement unwavering. At each milestone, they marked it on the whiteboard with a star and celebrated with a slice of lemon poppy cake from the local bakery. 3 weeks after the accident, Aurelia took her first unassisted steps across the living room rug. Thorne held his breath. She wobbled, one crutch aloft, then straightened, eyes shining. He sprang forward, enveloping her in a victorious embrace. Aurelia, peeking around the doorway, applauded with tears in her eyes. Serafina gave a whoop worthy of a stadium. Lachlan grinned from the hallway. Aurelia's face broke into a tired, ecstatic grin of her own. She reached out, steadying herself, and allowed the cheers to wash over her like healing rain. In Ember Hollow, a month later, the annual community festival, the very event that had first brought Verdantia Labs and Verdant Harbor Initiative together, unfolded beneath towering firs and Art Deco lanterns. Aurelia hobbled onto the demo stage, assisted by Thorne, to address the crowd about her article on inclusive urban farming. The microphone trembled slightly in her hand, but her voice rang clear. "I want to thank my family, my husband, his parents, and my sister-in-law, who carried me through a very dark time. Their care taught me that community isn't just about soil and sensors. It's about people who stand by you when you fall, literally." She gestured toward Thorne, Aurelia, Lachlan, and Serafina, who sat in the front row, tears shining in their eyes. The audience rose in spontaneous applause. Aurelia's heart swelled. After her talk, Thorne guided her back to the safety of the picnic blanket. She leaned into him, crutches parked like silent guardians. They watched children race spoon-balancing eggs and elders exchange heirloom tomato recipes. The festival's laughter and music wove through the air like a benediction. In that moment, surrounded by healing, support, and shared purpose, Aurelia and Thorne understood that their accident had not derailed their path, but illuminated it. The fragility of bone had revealed the strength of the heart. And as they sat beneath the emerald canopy of Ember Hollow, their entwined hands rested lightly on her healing leg, they knew that no matter what life hurled their way, they would face it together, steadfast, compassionate, united by every triumph and trial. After weeks of delicate balance between recovery and support, looking at each other across the living room of their temporary Meridian Row apartment, Aurelia and Thorne felt the time had come to bring their life and their unbreakable bond back to Ember Hollow. Their agreement had always included returning to the Blackwood family estate, not only as a gesture of gratitude, but to create a home where both tradition and innovation could flourish. The morning they packed up the last of their boxes, Ember Hollow lay blanketed in mist. Thorne navigated the car down the familiar gravel drive, each turn reminding them of laughter-filled barbecues and snow-sprinkled holidays. Aurelia, sitting in the passenger seat with crutches stored carefully in the back, breathed deeply, memories of her accident eclipsed now by excitement at new beginnings. She reached across to squeeze his hand. Their first order of business was the small fixer-upper on the edge of Blackwood property, a cottage once used to store farm tools. Lachlan and Aurelia had offered it as a temporary residence, rent-free, to help them ease back into family rhythms. Weeks earlier, Lachlan had handed them a set of dusty blueprints and a paintbrush, declaring, "Make it yours." Now, Thorne steered the car toward that abandoned structure, its windows boarded and wild vines climbing the siding. Aurelia arrived in her crossover moments later, arms laden with coffee and homemade scones. Serafina appeared behind her, a messenger of fresh paint samples and housewarming smiles. Together, the four of them unlocked the cottage door and stepped into a dusty shell of bare floors and peeling wallpaper. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its filaments dim under the weight of years. "Imagine," Lachlan said, sweeping an arm through the air, Hardwood floors, built-in shelving here. He pointed to a blank wall. And a reading nook by that window. Aurelia set down the coffee tray on a folding table. And a kitchen island, she added, where we can roll out dough together. Aurelia surveyed the space, heart fluttering. She crouched to lift a loose floorboard, revealing the original oak beneath. "This is beautiful," she whispered. Thorne caught her gaze. "We'll restore it." They spent that first day clearing debris, measuring walls, and marking lines in chalk. The family rallied. Lachlan wielded a sledgehammer to remove old cabinets. Serafina scraped wallpaper with eager efficiency. Aurelia sorted salvageable materials, and Thorne and Aurelia mapped out the open concept layout they'd always dreamed of, combining modern flow with rustic warmth. By sunset, the cottage had changed from abandoned relic to blank canvas. Aurelia and Thorne walked home wrapped in flecks of plaster and sawdust, exhilarated by the promise of creation. As they reached the main house, lights glowing in every window, they realized this project would not only renovate wood and stone but also cement their place within the Blackwood legacy. The following weekend, they enlisted a local contractor, family friend turned small business owner, who marveled at their detailed plans. He agreed to coordinate plumbing and electrical upgrades while Aurelia and Thorne, guided by Aurelia's patient tutoring, tackled painting and finishing touches themselves. The first coat of soft sage green on the walls transformed the narrow hallway, infusing it with a sense of calm they both craved. Painting together on ladders became a dance of trust. Overhead beams required one of them to steady the ladder below, while the other wielded a roller. In those moments, they learned to anticipate each other's balance, to steady trembling hands, and to quietly laugh at mismatched roller strokes. Their laughter echoed off fresh paint, a joyful symphony marking each step forward. Inside, they ripped out old carpeting and installed reclaimed oak planks that Lachlan had stored in the barn. Each board they fitted carried history, knots and grain telling tales of trees that once shaded generations of Blackwoods. Thorne waxed and sealed the surface, then led Aurelia in buffing until the wood gleamed like a riverbed under sunlight. She followed his movements, learning the strokes that brought out the patina's depth. When they completed the main room floor, they stood together, hands on hips, beaming. Amid renovations, they carved out rituals reminiscent of their Seattle life. Mornings began in the cottage's new kitchenette. Aurelia poured steaming coffee into chipped, mismatched mugs they'd rescued from the attic. Thorne brewed tea when she needed a break from caffeine. They sat at a reclaimed farmhouse table, sharing plans for the day, laying tile in the bathroom, installing the new farmhouse sink, or deciding on hardware styles for the kitchen cabinets. Under afternoon light, Thorne installed custom floating shelves in what would become their home office nook. He drilled pilot holes and secured brackets while Aurelia arranged potted plants and framed photographs from their travels. Each image, a rain-drenched alley in Portland, a lavender field near Yakima, a rainy day selfie in Seattle, found a place on those shelves, weaving personal memories into the fabric of their new home. After work, they retreated to the porch swing they'd assembled from repurposed cedar. Drinking iced tea, they watched the sun dip behind the fir trees. Their conversation drifting from paint colors to children's names or the shape of future bookshelves. They sketched rough diagrams in a weathered notebook, dreaming in pencil and ink about built-in benches or a bit of stained glass over the front window. Weekends were punctuated by small celebrations, scones and coffee after a morning of tile work, pizza delivered when they were too exhausted to cook, and impromptu movie nights projected onto a blank wall, their first film screened on a sheet hung by painter's tape. They curled up under blankets on freshly sanded floors, feeling every plank and nail as tangible proof of their shared accomplishments. Neighbors stopped by, offering advice. A tip for mixing grout more smoothly, a suggestion for sourcing affordable fixtures, a loan of a sander. Each act of kindness wove them deeper into the community tapestry. Aurelia realized that building a home meant more than erecting walls. It meant nurturing relationships and accepting help with humility and gratitude. As the cottage took shape, walls painted, floors complete, plumbing functional, they turned to the landscape. The yard, once overgrown and tangled, became a gardener's sanctuary. Thorne and Aurelia laid out raised beds for vegetables. Aurelia planted heirloom tomatoes and lilacs. Serafina mapped a wildflower patch that would bloom each spring in riotous color. Thorne installed a drip irrigation system he designed, using remnants of Verdantia Lab's sensor technology to monitor soil moisture. Evenings found them tending seedlings by lantern light, trading jokes and stories as tiny green shoots broke soil. The scent of damp earth and lavender hung in the air. Their cottage, once cold and empty, now pulsed with life and purpose. Inside, a corner study filled with books and plans served as both office and craft room. Thorne set up his workstation with monitors and schematics. Aurelia claimed the adjacent desk. Her notebooks stacked high. They shared a single printer, coordinating morning schedules to avoid bottlenecks. Overlapping days off. They collaborated on presentations, her narrative flair paired with his data visualizations, reminding them how far their partnership had grown since those early Seattle coffee dates. At night, they retreated to the attic loft they had converted into a reading nook, built in benches, lanterns, style sconces, and soft cushions from Serafina's favorite fabric. Here, they closed out each day with a chapter or two of a novel, the hush broken only by the creak of rafters and the distant call of owls. Their relationship thrived in the rhythms of home building. Brushes against each other in tight doorways, whispered praise for a well, hung cabinet, the unspoken pledge to keep sweat, laughter, and purpose at the heart of every project. In the act of transforming a forgotten cottage into a vibrant, welcoming sanctuary, they renewed their vows to one another more deeply than any ring or ceremony could convey. By mid-October, the cottage had blossomed from a half-demolished tool shed into a vibrant home that married rustic charm with modern comfort. The final milestone was the opening of the porch, once a narrow stoop, now a wide deck of reclaimed cedar planks, painted twilight blue. Thorne and Aurelia spent a crisp morning sealing the deck boards with tung oil, inhaling the rich wood scent as they worked side by side. Once the surface gleamed, they stepped back to admire their handiwork, a perfect spot for morning coffee and evening conversations. That weekend, Ember Hollow buzzed with anticipation for a housewarming party. Invitations had gone out weeks earlier. Neighbors, friends from Verdantia Labs, and members of the Verdant Harbor Initiative. As dusk settled, lanterns lined the driveway, and a bounty of pumpkins and decorative gourds framed the blue door. Aurelia emerged from the main house, carrying platters of butternut squash soup, creamy, spiced with nutmeg, and a dollop of creme fraiche. Serafina followed, balancing trays of miniature apple galettes, their caramelized edges glinting in the lantern light. Thorne greeted crushed stone arrivals at the driveway's edge, offering hot apple cider. Aurelia, crutches momentarily abandoned inside, guided guests into the warm glow of the living area. Soft music drifted from the study nook where floating shelves displayed their mementos, pressed wildflowers, travel photos, and custom Verdantia sensor circuits that blinked in living synergy. Housemates from their Seattle apartment beamed with pride. Even Baxter, the kindly retiree next door, marveled at the cottage's transformation. They mingled by the kitchen island, its butcher block top now polished to a lustrous sheen, where Thorne had set up a self-serve charcuterie spread. Local cheeses, cured meats from the Ember Hollow smokehouse, artisanal jams from market finds. Aurelia circulated, greeting friends with warm hugs. Her cast-iron skillet now relegated to the shelf alongside strainers and sauté pans. She paused by the window overlooking the raised garden beds, where frost-tender plants glowed under solar-powered string lights. She reflected on planting those seeds together, the midnight pep talks, the midnight prunings, and how each bud heralded renewal. Aurelia caught Thorne's eye across the room. He raised his glass in toast. She returned the gesture, weaving through conversations until she found her family, Aurelia, Lachlan, and Serafina clustered near the fireplace. Flames danced in the hearth they'd built, A stone mantel salvaged from the barn holding flickering candles and a single framed blueprint of the original cottage plans. "Well done," Lachlan murmured, slipping a hand around her shoulder. "You've made this place shine." Aurelia nodded, tears glinting. "It's more than I ever imagined." Serafina nudged her sister-in-law. "And we couldn't be prouder." Aurelia swallowed, grateful, overwhelmed by the circle of support. "I couldn't have done it without all of you." Laughter and chatter swelled as more guests arrived. The party flowed seamlessly from appetizer to soup. From main courses, roasted root vegetables and pan-seared trout, to dessert of spiced pear crumbles. In the background, Thorne offered impromptu tours. The study nook where he'd integrated soil moisture sensors into desk planters, the laundry room now repainted and outfitted with an oversized utility sink, the bathroom's new hexagonal tile floor, a pale gray that set off gleaming white subway walls. Each room told the story of their collaboration and of family helping family. Later, wrapped in soft blankets on the porch swing, Aurelia and Thorne stole a moment away from the crowd. Below them, guests drifted between yard games, cornhole, and scavenger hunts among the flower beds, laughter echoing softly in night air scented with sage and thyme. Overhead, stars peeked through drifting clouds. "This," Thorne said, voice gentle, "is exactly what I dreamed of." Aurelia leaned into him. "Me too. But more than that, it's ours." He kissed her temple. "We built this together." She smiled, heartful. Every plank, every paint stroke. He cast his gaze over the cottage's silhouette against the moonlit sky, windows aglow, porch lanterns twinkling like fireflies, vines framing the entrance in elegant arcs. "Our very own Ember Hollow cottage," he said. "Family, friends, love, all under one roof." Their moment was interrupted by Serafina's cheerful whistle. "Come on, lovebirds, your first dance." She pointed to a cleared patch of grass where a portable speaker played an old jazz standard. Guests gathered in a circle, clapping to the beat. Thorne extended his hand to Aurelia. Without hesitation, she took it. They stepped into the grass, crutches set aside as guests formed an appreciative audience, and swayed to the music. Thorne's arms encircled her waist, her hands rested on his shoulders. They moved in gentle, unhurried circles, smiles soft in the flickering lantern light. Around them, laughter and applause rose and fell like waves. In that dance, they reaffirmed their partnership, two souls intimately attuned, grounded by shared dreams and tested by adversity. Music shifted to a soft waltz, and Thorne dipped her. She laughed, the sound tinkling in night air. When he lifted her back upright, their foreheads touched. Aurelia whispered, Thank you for bringing me home." He brushed his lips against hers. "Thank you for trusting me." The dance ended with heartfelt applause, then gave way to slow conversations around fire pits and mugs of mulled wine. The housewarming wound down into small clusters, families comparing gardening tips, old friends swapping Seattle anecdotes, Ember Hollow residents promising to collaborate on the next community project. As the last guests departed, Aurelia, Lachlan, and Serafina gathered on the porch with Aurelia and Thorne. They worked together to round up lanterns, fold chairs, and sweep stray leaves from the deck. In the crisp night air, the satisfaction of a day well lived warmed them more than jackets could. With the cottage quiet again, Thorne guided Aurelia inside. They flicked off lanterns, leaving only one by the front door. Stepping into the warmth, they slid a bolt into the frame. Inside, the home felt alive with possibilities. The gleam of clean counters, the soft hum of the sensor-driven garden lights through the window, the faint aroma of peel and eat shrimp left in the sink. Aurelia sat at the hearth's edge by the glowing embers. Thorne knelt to brush soot from her trousers. She reached out to hold his hand. "Every step worth it," she murmured. He nodded, eyes bright. "Our dream realized." He swept a twig from the hearth. "But even better, our life continues." They paused in the glow of that fireplace, hand in hand, hearts full, surrounded by the solid reality of family and home. In the soft embers' light, they saw not just a completed cottage, but the living promise of all the tomorrows they would build there together. When Aurelia and Thorne first set foot in their newly renovated Ember Hollow cottage with cradled blue shutters and lantern-lit eaves, they never imagined how swiftly life would begin its next great chapter. Still, by the time Orion Blackwood celebrated his first birthday under the very same fir boughs that once shaded their courting strolls, it felt as if the universe had choreographed every step to bring them here. Now, 2 years later, the cottage has grown into a cradle of family joy, its walls echoing with laughter, its windows opening onto the future. Early mornings in this house have become a hymn of contentment. Sunlight spills through gauzy curtains as Aurelia rises well before dawn, padding barefoot to the kitchen. She heats filtered well water, whisks in matcha powder, and pours a frothy latte, all before Thorne appears at the doorway with 2 curious toddlers in tow. 8-year-old Penelope, wiry and wide-eyed, tugs at her father's sleeve, while 4-year-old Selim balances precariously on his training wheels, ready for their daily morning cruise around the yard. Thorne offers each child a hot chocolate topped with whipped cream, garnished by a single strawberry from the raised beds. And they clink mugs in gentle solidarity, a ritual of shared beginnings. In the heart of the home stands a weathered farmhouse table, its surface speckled with years of paint splatters and tiny handprints, where they gather for breakfast. Thorne flips whole-grain pancakes, drizzles them with local maple syrup, and watches delighted squeals as the children press their plates into family portraits. Aurelia recalls how, during her pregnancy, she and Thorne had mapped out every corner of the cottage, where Selim's crib would stand, where the playmat would unfurl, where they'd tuck Penelope into a reading nook lined with pillows and storybooks. Now, each carefully planned detail finds purpose in daily life. A ladder-backed chair placed just so for cooking demos with eager little chefs, a clutch of potted herbs within reach for fresh pizza toppings on Friday nights. After breakfast, the children report for duty in the garden. Penelope tugs on her miniature rubber boots and surveys the vegetable beds with the expertise of a young farmer. She knows exactly which tomatoes need staking and which bean trellises require repair. Selim toddles behind with a small watering can, determined to splash each plant with gentle streams. Under the watchful eye of their parents, they coax rainbow chard and kale from the earth, pluck basil leaves for mid-morning pesto, and harvest zucchini blossoms destined for lightly fried fritters. These garden sessions have blossomed into life lessons, patience taught by slow growth, responsibility imparted through daily care, and wonder inspired by each newly sprouted leaf. By midday, the scent of Wrenwood and rosemary drifts through open windows as the family returns indoors for lunch. Archaeological expeditions to the pantry produce soft flatbreads, hummus from last week's chickpea harvest, crudité made crisp by celery and carrot stalks grown just beyond the trellis. The children perch on stools at the island while Aurelia and Thorne trade recaps of their morning, her latest draft on sustainable agriculture, his progress on the community-funded sensor network that now tracks soil moisture in Ember Hollow's elementary school garden. As afternoon light deepens, the house transforms once more. Penelope curls up in her reading nook, devouring fairy tales and science fiction spines with equal appetite. Selim, newly unshackled from training wheels, zooms around the wide living room rug on his scooter, laughter echoing off the reclaimed oak floors. Thorne pulls up an easel in the sunroom for his watercolor experiments, landscape studies of the forest canopy, while Aurelia settles at her desk, drafting a keynote speech on intergenerational farming for an upcoming conference. Their separate pursuits unfold in companionable silence, punctuated by the hiss of the kettle or the clink of paintbrushes against water jars. Then comes the ritual of afternoon tea. Aurelia sets a tray with chamomile mint infusion grown steps away, honey harvested by the local apiary, and petite lemon bars cooled on the windowsill. The family gathers on the porch swing, for legs dangling, 2 curled beneath, and a swaying motion that lulls them into conversation. They speak of everything, Penelope's dream of starting a chick club, Selim's fascination with diggers and dump trucks, Thorne's hopes to expand Verdantia Labs into youth education, and Aurelia's quiet wish to write a children's book co-authored by her daughter. Heritage and hope mingle with each sip, weaving the past's lessons into the bright tapestry of tomorrow. Evenings bring a new rhythm, as dusk paints the sky in lavender and rose. The front door swings closed, and the family heads to the fire pit Michael and Aurelia built so many seasons ago. Together, they stoke. These are the moments that solidify the legacy. A daughter's laughter as she leaps over hot coals, a son's sleepy head resting on his father's shoulder, parents who nurture both garden and heart with equal care. The cottage no longer stands alone in the clearing. It pulses with multi-generational love, each room a vessel of memory and promise. Late at night, when the house lies silent except for the soft breathing of children tucked beneath quilted blankets, Aurelia and Thorne retreat to their bedroom. Beside the bed stands Penelope's favorite Dream Star nightlight, casting a gentle glow that refracts through crystal prisms. They lie side by side, hands linked, and drift into whispered reflections. How swiftly seasons change, how swiftly children grow, and how swiftly a dream of home can become a living tapestry of legacy. But the story does not end here. For in Ember Hollow, the next generation already starts to stir. Newborn twins expected in spring, a cousin moving in from Seattle to apprentice in orchard care, and a community garden expansion that will require every hand and heart. As Aurelia drifts to sleep in Thorne's arms, she knows that this chapter, though rich with fulfillment, only paves the way for the next book of their shared adventure. And across the hall, in rooms painted soft sunrise hues, lie tiny cribs and empty swings, waiting to cradle fresh laughter and new dreams. But the story does not end there. As winter thawed into spring, the Blackwood cottage welcomed its newest arrivals. Twin daughters, Serena and Aloan, each with a head full of downy hair and a cry that seemed to harmonize in perfect thirds with their big brother's gurgles of approval. The morning they arrived, Penelope and Selim peered wide-eyed through the nursery door, their small faces pressed against the glass. Thorne lifted each baby, first Serena, then Aloan, briefly, so that their siblings could be the first to greet them. Penelope touched Serena's tiny hand with reverence. Selim blew a sneeze of baby kisses on Aloan's forehead. Aurelia, eyes shining with tears, watched her 4 children united under the soft glow of dawn. In the days that followed, the cottage hummed with joyful chaos. Morning light found Thorne establishing a school of siblings, where Penelope guided her brothers and sisters in simple chores, feeding the barn cat, gathering fallen twigs for kindling, or wiping down low shelving. His pride was boundless as he watched Penelope cradle little Aloan in her arms, her 8th birthday fresh yet full of newfound responsibility. Selim, not to be outdone, insisted on pushing his baby sister's stroller along the garden paths, giggling with glee as the twins cooed at the fluttering leaves overhead. Eulalia and Lachlan alternated nights in the nursery, offering midnight lullabies and startled smiles in the glow of dimmed lamps. Serafina, forever the doting aunt, volunteered to teach Penelope how to braid hair, promising to show her embroidery techniques for tiny blankets. Even Baxter, their kindly neighbor, ambled by with extra fresh eggs and anecdotes from his chicken coop, declaring, "Nothing like a bit of fresh farm air for newborn lungs." Outside, the orchard teemed with promise. Last autumn's apple shoots had burst into pale blossoms, their petals drifting like pink snow across the rows. Thorne installed a second iteration of his soil sensor network, layering moisture meters beneath the mulch so they could track hydration for each tree. Aurelia hung tiny ribbons of woven lavender from the branches, a practice she'd learned in her grandmother's village, an old-world charm to bless new life. Together, they harvested the first peaches and apricots, planning a community tasting day to raise funds for local school gardens. Spring celebrations carried new meaning. At Easter, the community festival in Ember Hollow Park overflowed with families. Penelope led her little sisters in an egg-decorating booth, while Selim and his friends raced each other with painted eggs balanced on wooden spoons. Thorne and Aurelia manned a lemonade stand, fresh squeezed, sweetened with garden's mint, and donated proceeds to the new twin birthing fund at the clinic. The twins dozed in a slung hammock nearby, lulled by the hum of neighbors and the distant cluck of hens. Summertime brought life to every corner of their world. The vegetable beds yielded tender heirloom tomatoes, vivid chard, and sweet peas climbing trellises like green confetti. With Serena and Aloan toddling among Coligro vines, Penelope helped weave bean teepees, singing softly to keep them calm. Selim fetched watering cans, each dip into the rain-collected barrels an act of shared stewardship. Children's laughter alternated with the soft drip of irrigation lines calibrated by Thorne's app, creating a symphony of harmony between nature and ingenuity. Evenings glowed gold when the family gathered by the fire pit for seasonal readings. Aurelia told tales of her grandmother's forest home, while Thorne taught Selim how to use a star chart to identify Orion's belt, the namesake of their eldest son. Penelope, perched on a stump, sketched the constellations in cardstock with chalk, practicing the design she would later paint on the twins' nursery ceiling. Firelight flickered across, cypress logs creaking, sage embers rising like bright prayers to the night sky. In autumn, the first full harvest rolled in. Ember Hollow's annual harvest fair rotated to the cottage grounds. Neighbors brought pies, pickles, and preserves. Local musicians strummed guitars beneath swaying lanterns. Penelope led a pumpkin carving contest, her creativity shining in every jack-o'-lantern face. Selim ran a wheelbarrow race, feeding pumpkins into thorny straw bales as his sisters toddled in tow, while Thorne displayed a new pavilion of sensor-driven irrigation. Drawing applause from the County Agricultural Board, Aurelia offered slices of pear and ginger galette, her own recipe, paired with cider spiced from orchard apples. When twilight fell, the family clambered onto the porch swing for their traditional harvest lullaby. Under a canopy of glowing luminaries, Aurelia led a soft melody she had written for the twins' bedtime, a gentle tune blending lullaby, promise, and gratitude. Under these ancient boughs we grow, for little miracles we know, roots entwined in hearth and home, together, never more to roam. She paused, her voice catching as she looked at Thorne's broad, smiling face. He leaned close, their shoulders touching in the cool evening air. Serena and Aloan slept curled in blankets at Aurelia's feet. Selim and Penelope nestled beside them, coveting the final refrains. The audience, warmed by community pride and generational love, hummed the last notes in tender resonance. As the fair wound down, lanterns flickered on the field and the golden leaves drifted like confetti across mossy stones. The Blackwoods walked the length of their orchard, hand in hand, while the children chased one another among the trunks. They paused at the oldest apple tree, its bark gnarled with age and stories of generations past. Thorne traced the initials carved near its base. Ye and Mr. 1932. Eulalia's parents, long since passed, had begun the orchard. Now, their descendants stood beneath those same branches, adding new initials beside the old. In that moment, Aurelia realized how seamlessly the past and future had woven together. Their family was a living braid of memory and hope. Great-grandparents whispered prayers in wind-rocked fields, grandparents' lullabies, parents' steady hands, and the bright dreams of children yet to grow. She pressed her palm to the sturdy bark, imagining Penelope and Selim inscribing their own mark one day, perhaps with Serena and Aloan sneaking giggles behind them. Winter crept in on cold wings, but the cottage remained radiant with festivity. The annual solstice celebration, complete with evergreens and candlelight, saw 4 generations gathering for cocoa spiked with nutmeg and cinnamon. Serenading voices carried across the hearth as they sang carols old and new. Selim, perched on Thorne's shoulders, reached to hang a star ornament atop the spruce tree in the corner. Penelope followed with glass baubles of azure and rose, each reflecting the twinkling forest outside. Serena and Aloan watched from their cushioned rocker, swaddled in blankets that Serafina had crocheted in pastel loops. Aurelia looked around the room. Thick wool rugs, clustered cushions, shelves heavy with books and heirlooms, and felt a surge of wonder. This house, once an abandoned shed, had become a sanctuary of generational love, a testament to resilience and shared purpose. Every seam in the hand-stitched quilt on the sofa told a story of laughter, tears, and quiet determination to build a legacy. That night, after the last carols faded and good nights were whispered, Aurelia and Thorne retired to their loft bedroom. The twins slept in their crib beyond a half-door. Penelope and Selim lay in twin beds beneath the loft eaves, their breathing slow and peaceful. Thorne lowered the skylight blinds, dimming the soft glow of the moon. "Look how far we've come," Aurelia breathed, her cheek resting on his chest. He nodded, kissing the top of her head. "We dreamed big and small, coffee, plants, overnight changes. None of it would mean a thing without family." She smiled, tracing a finger over the silver wedding band on his finger. "And now we have our next generation, too." He tightened his arms. To tomorrow's dreams, big and small. They lay in silence as the house settled around them, creaks of wood, the hush of winter wind. The starlight flickered through the roof window, illuminating their contented faces. And as they drifted into dreams, the cottage breathed with them, its walls cradling the past, its hearth nourishing the present, its porch opening onto a future bright with the laughter of grandchildren yet to come. Their story, like the orchard and the garden, would grow in rings of love, each new season adding depth and beauty. And in that perfect closing chapter, family bliss and the promise of tomorrow entwined. They knew their legacy would flourish for generations, yet to walk beneath Ember Hollow's furlay skies. And that brings us to the end of today's story on Truistery Vibes. Don't forget to leave a comment with a quote or moment that touched you the most. Your words give our team the motivation to keep creating more heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.